The hall shimmered under golden chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of expensive cologne, wine, and freshly polished floors. The crowd, men in crisp, tailored suits and women draped in glittering gowns, moved in calculated elegance, their laughter blending with the soft classical music streaming from hidden speakers. Waiters in white gloves weaved through the clusters of guests, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. Olamide was in his element. Standing at the center of the grand room, he shook hands with business partners, investors, and government officials. His smile was wide, his laughter easy, his presence commanding. He spoke in measured tones, weaving charisma and power into every word. To the world, he was a successful entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a man who had it all, including the perfect wife. Amaka stood beside him, her posture poised, her face composed into the mask she had perfected over the years. Her emerald green gown hugged her calves, the slit teasing a well-toned leg, her dark skin glowing under the warm lights. Her makeup was impeccable, hiding every imperfection, every shadow of pain. Her smile, though practiced, was radiant. And yet, she felt nothing. "Your wife is stunning," one of Olamide's business associates commented, swirling his glass of wine. He turned to Amaka with an appreciative nod. "Truly, a rare gem." Olamide's grip on her waist tightened just slightly. Amaka felt the pressure, knew what it meant, and adjusted her expression accordingly, with just the right amount of demureness, just the right hint of adoration. "I am indeed a lucky man," Olamide said, his voice laced with possession. Amaka lowered her gaze, playing her part. Across the room, Nkechi watched. She had been Amaka's friend since their university days, and over the years, she had learned to read between the lines of Amaka's carefully curated facade. She saw past the lavish outfits, the socialite perfection. She saw the stiffness in Amaka's shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. She had seen the bruises before, half hidden beneath long sleeves, concealed under layers of expensive foundation. But more than that, Nkechi had seen the fear. The type of fear that settled into the bones, the kind that turned silence into a prison. Amaka caught Nkechi's gaze from across the room. A second passed between them, heavy and unspoken. Nkechi raised an eyebrow, a question in her eyes. "Are you okay?" Amaka's lips parted, just slightly, but then. Olamide shifted beside her, his hand sliding from her waist to the small of her back, his fingers pressing against her spine. She swallowed hard and looked away, forcing another practiced smile. "I should freshen up," she murmured. Olamide turned to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. It was a look she knew well. "Did I give you permission to leave my side?" It asked without words. But in public, he was still the charming husband. He nodded. "Of course, my love." Amaka made her way through the crowd, feeling the weight of eyes on her. Some were admiring, some envious, some oblivious. None of them knew the truth. The car ride home was quiet. Tense. Amaka kept her gaze fixed on the city lights flashing past the window, counting silently in her head. She knew the silence would not last. It never did. "You embarrassed me tonight." His voice was calm. Too calm. "I didn't," she said softly, carefully. "You did." She could feel his gaze burning into her, even in the darkness of the car. "You were distant. Cold. People notice these things, Amaka. Do you want them thinking I can't control my wife?" Her fingers curled against her lap. She inhaled deeply. "I was just tired. It was a long night." Olamide chuckled. It was a low, dangerous sound. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, squeezing just enough to send a sharp pain shooting up her arm. She sucked in a breath but didn't pull away. "Do not test me, Amaka," he whispered. His breath was warm against her ear, but it sent chills down her spine. "You belong to me. Do you understand?" Amaka closed her eyes briefly. "Yes. I understand." When they arrived home, she barely had time to remove her earrings before the first lap came. Her head snapped to the side, her skin stinging, her vision blurring. She stumbled but caught herself against the dresser. Olamide was calm as he unbuttoned his cufflinks, as if nothing had happened. Don't make me look weak in front of my associates. Amaka touched her cheek, felt the heat spreading across her skin. She said nothing. She had learned that words meant nothing. But she had also learned something else. Silence could be a weapon. And she was about to use it. The cafe was nearly empty, its dim lighting casting long shadows across the walls. Soft jazz hummed from the speakers, and the scent of fresh coffee mingled with the faint trace of rain from outside. The afternoon was grey, overcast, matching the mood that hung between the two women. Amaka sat by the window, fingers wrapped around a cup of tea she had no intention of drinking. She kept her head low, her large sunglasses covering half her face. Even with the makeup she had hurriedly applied, the swelling on her cheekbone was still visible if one looked closely enough. Nkechi looked. With a sharp inhale, Nkechi reached across the table and gently touched Amaka's wrist. This has to stop. Amaka tensed at the contact. She had heard those words before, spoken by Nkechi, whispered by well-meaning strangers, muttered by doctors who pretended not to see the patterns in her injuries. She let out a slow breath. I know. Nkechi's grip tightened. Then leave. A bitter laugh escaped Amaka's lips as she pulled her hand back. She shook her head, stirring her tea absently with a spoon. And go where? Her voice was barely above a whisper. He owns everything. The house, the cars, the bank accounts. He knows everyone. He could make me disappear, and no one would ask questions. Nkechi clenched her fist. That bastard. And if I run, Amaka cut in, her voice cracking, he'll take my kids. You know he will. He's already threatened it before. And with his money, his connections. Nkechi, I wouldn't stand a chance in court. Her hands trembled around the cup. She wasn't just afraid of losing custody, she was afraid of what Olamide would do to her children. He had never raised a hand against them, but he didn't need to. The threat was always there, lingering in the way he spoke, in the way David flinched whenever his father's voice turned cold. Silence stretched between them. Nkechi tapped her nails against the wooden table, deep in thought. Then she leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then we take him down first. Amaka froze. Slowly, she looked up, their eyes locking. Nkechi's gaze was steady, determined. What if we get proof? Nkechi pressed. Real proof. Not just bruises, videos, recordings. Evidence that would destroy him. Amaka's lips parted, but no words came. Her thoughts whirled. Evidence. She had spent years covering the marks, deleting messages, smiling in public while dying in private. She had played the role of the perfect wife because there was no other choice. Because no one would believe her if she spoke. But if she had proof, undeniable, inescapable proof. A flicker of something dangerous entered Amaka's eyes. Hope. But it was quickly snuffed out by fear. If he finds out. He won't, Nkechi said quickly. You'll have to be careful, but it can be done. Hidden cameras, voice recordings, anything to capture him when he shows his true colors. Amaka hesitated, staring down at her reflection in the tea. Could she do it? Could she finally fight back? Her mind raced through the possibilities. If she got the evidence, if she exposed him, he would lose everything, his business, his reputation, his freedom. But there was another possibility, a more terrifying one. If he caught her before she could do it, she wouldn't live to regret it. She shuddered. As if sensing her thoughts, Nkechi reached across the table again, gripping Amaka's hands tightly. You can do this. And you won't be alone. The words settled in her chest, heavy but steady. For years, she had been alone. She had suffered in silence, believing that was the only option. But now, sitting across from Nkechi, a different path appeared before her, one where she wasn't powerless. Slowly, she nodded. Nkechi exhaled, relief washing over her face. Okay. First things first, we need a plan. A plan. A way out. For the first time in years, Amaka felt like she was taking control of her own fate. The first time Amaka set up a hidden camera, her hands trembled so violently that she almost dropped it. Her breath was shaky as she crouched behind the large oak dresser in the master bedroom, positioning the small device carefully between a stack of old books. The tiny lens peered out, watching, recording. Her heart pounded in her ears as she adjusted the angle, making sure it had a clear view of the room. If Olamide found it, she would be dead. She pressed record. For a few moments, she remained frozen, staring at the blinking red light. The weight of what she was doing settled in her chest. There would be no turning back. She swallowed hard, straightened up, and forced herself to breathe. It was only the beginning. Olamide made it easy. That very night, as if the universe had conspired in her favor, he handed her the first piece of evidence on a silver platter. It started the way it always did, with silence. They had just returned from dinner with his colleagues, and Amaka had done everything right. She had worn the dress he picked, smiled at the right moments, laughed when necessary. She had played her part flawlessly. But Olamide was in a foul mood. Maybe someone had offended him. Maybe a deal had gone wrong. Maybe he just wanted an excuse. She was removing her earrings in front of the vanity mirror when he spoke. "You think I didn't see you?" Amaka froze. She met his gaze in the reflection, forcing her voice to stay steady. "See what?" Olamide tilted his head, studying her like a predator sizing up its prey. "You and that waiter," he said coolly. Smiling at him. Her pulse quickened. "I was being polite." His eyes darkened. She barely had time to react before his hand shot out, fingers clamping around her wrist. He yanked her to her feet, his grip like iron. "Polite," he echoed, his voice dangerously low. "You're mine, Amaka. Do you understand that?" She didn't respond. She had learned that silence was safer. Olamide wasn't satisfied. His grip tightened until she whimpered. Then the slap came, sharp and sudden, sending her head snapping to the side. Her vision blurred, stars bursting behind her eyes. She gasped, stumbling back. But in the corner of the room, the red light blinked. Watching. Recording. For the first time in years, she felt something other than fear. She felt power. As the days passed, Amaka became more confident. She set up more cameras, one behind the living room bookshelf, another in the hallway, one near the staircase. She hid a tiny voice recorder in the flower vase in the dining area. And every day, Olamide gave her more evidence. More threats. More bruises. More proof. At night, when he slept beside her, Amaka would quietly retrieve the memory cards, her hands steady now. She transferred the files to a hidden USB drive, watching the footage in silence, forcing herself to relive it. Every slap. Every shove. Every cruel whisper. It made her sick. But she endured it because the evidence was growing. She was building a case. A way out. Then came the night that broke her. It had been a bad evening. Olamide had come home late, his face twisted in anger. He didn't need a reason. Amaka had barely spoken a word before he struck her. She crumpled to the floor, gasping for breath, arms curled around her ribs. The pain was sharp, radiating through her body. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. She had learned that making noise only made it worse. But then, a small voice, trembling. "Daddy, stop." Amaka's eyes snapped open. Her heart stopped. She turned her head slowly, dread sinking into her bones. David stood at the doorway in his pajamas, barefoot, his tiny fist clenched. His wide eyes darted between them, fear shadowing his small face. Olamide froze. Then, slowly, a smile crept onto his lips. He turned to face their son, adjusting his shirt cuffs casually, as if he hadn't just beaten his wife to the ground. "This is between mommy and daddy, isn't it, son?" David's lip trembled. And then, in the smallest, weakest voice, he nodded. Amaka felt something inside her shatter. Her son had learned the price of disobedience. She saw it in the way he cowered, in the way his little shoulders tensed, in the way he already understood that speaking up would only bring pain. No. She would not let David grow up to be his father. She would not let her daughter think this was normal. She would not stay in this house another day. This was it. The moment she realized she had no choice. She had to leave. Even if it cost her everything. Midnight. The house was silent, but Amaka's pulse roared in her ears. She moved swiftly, stuffing a small bag with only the essentials, some cash, the children's birth certificates, a few clothes. There was no time for sentimentality. No time for hesitation. David and his younger sister, Ada, stood beside her, their tiny hands gripping hers tightly. She could feel David's fingers trembling. He was old enough to understand what was happening. Ada, only 4, clutched her stuffed elephant against her chest, her sleepy eyes confused but obedient. Amaka bent down and cupped their faces. "Remember what I told you, okay?" she whispered. "No noise. We have to be very quiet." David nodded quickly. Ada mimicked him. Swallowing her fear, Amaka slowly opened the bedroom door, peeking into the hallway. Shadows stretched across the walls, the dim glow from the streetlights barely illuminating the space. Every creak of the wooden floor sounded like a gunshot in her ears. She led them down the corridor, toward the staircase. Her heart pounded with every step. Every shadow felt like Olamide. Every shift in the darkness felt like him breathing down her neck. She tightened her grip on the children. Almost there. They reached the bottom of the stairs. The front door loomed ahead, so close. Freedom was just one step away. Then. Going somewhere. Amaka froze. Her blood turned to ice. Slowly, she turned her head, terror clawing up her throat. Olamide stood at the top of the staircase, bathed in darkness, his eyes gleaming like a predator who had cornered its prey. The house was dead silent, but his voice slithered through it, low and venomous. "You really thought you could leave me?" He started descending, one slow step at a time. Deliberate. Controlled. Savoring the fear. David whimpered. Amaka shoved both children behind her, her body forming a shield. "Please, let us go," she whispered. Olamide chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "Go where?" He tilted his head. "You have nothing without me. No money, no home, no future. You belong to me, Amaka. Until death do us part." Amaka's breath came in sharp bursts. "I won't let you do this anymore." Olamide's smile widened. "Won't let me?" His voice was almost amused. "What are you going to do about it?" Then he lunged. Amaka barely had time to react before his hands were on her. She fought harder than she ever had, biting, scratching, kicking wildly. She was no longer the woman who endured in silence. She was a mother fighting for her children's lives. But Olamide was stronger. His grip was still, his fury unstoppable. He slammed her against the wall, knocking the air from her lungs. Pain exploded through her ribs. Her vision blurred, stars dancing before her eyes. "Mommy." David's voice. Choked with fear. She tried to move, but Olamide pinned her there, his breath hot against her ear. "You will never leave me." A noise behind them, footsteps. Olamide's grip didn't loosen, but his head turned slightly. The housekeeper. She stood in the hallway, her frail body silhouetted in the dim light. Her eyes darted between Amaka and Olamide. She had seen everything. Amaka's lips trembled. "Help me," she gasped. The housekeeper hesitated. She looked at Olamide, then back at Amaka. And then, slowly, she turned away. Walked away. The front door clicked shut behind her. Silence. Olamide turned back to Amaka, smirking. "No one will help you." Tears blurred her vision. This was it. She had failed. The next day, the world changed. It started as a whisper. A single post on social media. Then another. And another. A video had leaked, raw, undeniable footage. Olamide, towering over Amaka, his voice thick with menace. Olamide, slapping her so hard she crumpled to the ground. Olamide, laughing as she sobbed. The internet exploded. Outrage flooded every corner of social media. News outlets picked up the story. Hashtags filled timelines. Hashtag justice for Amaka. Hashtag stop domestic violence. Hashtag Olamide the monster. People were horrified. Women shared their own stories. Celebrities spoke out. Activists called for his arrest. His name, once spoken with respect, became a curse. His business partners panicked. Contracts were terminated. Deals were pulled. Investors vanished. Olamide's empire crumbled in real time. And then came the final blow. It was supposed to be his grand moment, a lavish birthday party at a 5-star hotel, filled with Lagos elite. The music was loud. The champagne flowed. Laughter echoed. Olamide stood at the center of it all, dressed in his finest suit, forcing a smile. He had done his best to control the damage, sending out press statements, trying to spin the narrative. But he felt it. The shift. The murmurs. The wary glances. The way people avoided his gaze. Still, he played along, determined to act like everything was fine. Then came the cake. A massive, multi-tiered masterpiece. A waiter handed him a knife, and with a tight smile, Olamide prepared to cut it. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. A projector flickered on. At first, the guests thought it was a tribute video. Something celebratory. Then, if you're seeing this, something happened to me. The room froze. The screen showed Amaka. Face swollen, eyes hollow, her voice trembling. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then the footage shifted. Olamide's voice, cold, menacing. Olamide's hand, striking, grabbing, shoving. Amaka, flinching, crying, begging. Clip after clip played. The bruises. The threats. The terror. A woman in the audience covered her mouth in horror. Someone muttered, "Jesus Christ." By the time the video ended, silence suffocated the room. All eyes turned to Olamide. He stood still, his face pale, his fingers twitching at his sides. Then, the sound of boots. The doors burst open. Police officers flooded in. Olamide Adeyemi, an officer announced, voice sharp. "You are under arrest for domestic abuse and attempted murder." Chaos erupted. Olamide's mask cracked. His face contorted in rage. This is a setup. A lie. He spun, searching for an exit. His survival instincts kicked in. He ran. But before he could reach the door, a figure stepped into his path. Nkechi. She stood firm, arms crossed, expression calm. Olamide skidded to a stop, eyes wide. "Get out of my way." Nkechi took a step forward, leaning in close, her voice like a blade. "You paid the price." The officers grabbed him. Metallic clicks. Handcuffs locked around his wrist. His screams were drowned out by the flashing cameras, the murmurs of guests, the judgment in every pair of eyes watching him fall. Olamide Adeyemi, the untouchable businessman, was finished. And Amaka. She was finally free. Weeks had passed. The world had moved on. Social media found new scandals. The news cycle shifted. Olamide's name faded into court proceedings and forgotten headlines. But for Nkechi, the story wasn't over. She arrived at the safe house, a quiet refuge tucked away in the outskirts of the city. The walls were freshly painted, the garden neatly kept. A place meant for healing. She carried gifts, small things for David and Ada. A stuffed elephant for Ada, just like the one she lost. A set of books for David, who had always been quiet, always watching. The caretaker greeted her at the door, recognizing her instantly. "I want to see her," Nkechi said. The caretaker didn't speak. Her expression said everything. Instead, she stepped aside and gestured toward the backyard. Nkechi's heart pounded. Slowly, she followed the woman outside. The air was heavy. The wind whispered through the trees. Then she saw it. A small grave. Fresh earth. A simple headstone. No flowers. No grand memorial. Just a name carved in stone. Amaka. Nkechi's breath hitched. She had never made it. Somewhere between the escape, the police investigation, and Olamide's downfall, Amaka had lost the battle. The bruises, the injuries, the years of suffering, her body couldn't take it anymore. She had survived him. But she hadn't survived the scars he left behind. Nkechi dropped to her knees, fist clenched. The price of silence was everything. A soft voice broke the silence. "Auntie Nkechi." She turned. David stood there, clutching his little sister's hand. His eyes, so much like his mother's, held a pain too deep for a child to carry. Nkechi forced a smile, even as tears burned her eyes. She reached into the bag, pulling out the gifts. "I brought you something." David took the books. Ade hugged the stuffed elephant. For a moment, there was silence. Then Ade whispered, "Is mommy in heaven now?" Nkechi swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes, baby," she said softly. "She's free now." The wind blew. The world moved on. But some wounds never heal. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more thrilling stories like this. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.